While we're waiting for Adrian to get our next speaker zoomed in, it is Eric Eaton, and he's a writer and an author. He's written many things. Insectpedia, The Astonishing Diversity of a Misunderstood Insect, also lead author of the Kaufman Field Guide to Insects of North America, and co-author of Insects Did It First. He has studied entomology at Oregon State University and has worked as a professional entomologist at the University of Massachusetts, the Cincinnati Zoo, and Chase Studio, as well as on contract with Smithsonian, West Virginia Division of Natural Resources, and the University of Colorado. And it looks like we have Eric.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm honored and flattered to be speaking to all of you. I wish I was still living in Colorado. I'm coming to you from Leavenworth, Kansas, voluntarily, not incarcerated. But given the fact that I've written this book about wasps, I still feel very inadequate in talking about them because they're so incredibly diverse, as we'll see in a minute. Before I go into the main reasons you should love wasps and, define what a wasp is, in fact, and then talk about things you can do to promote their diversity and enhance their abundance in your yard, which is what you want to do, trust me. I want to talk about why we hate wasps. And it has to do with the small percentage of species of wasps that we interact with the most and that we have the most awful encounters with. And that's mostly yellow jackets in your part of the world there. So they raid our picnics and our barbecues, right? And they harvest protein matter that they take back to the nest to feed their larval siblings because they need protein. And the wasps themselves will crawl into your soda can because they need carbohydrates to fuel their flight. So they do that. They raid our food supply. They also build their nests under the eaves of our houses. Why? Because our architecture mimics cliff faces and rock overhangs where they would nest naturally. Other species build their nests underground where we don't know that until we run over them with a lawnmower, and then that's a whole thing. So, these are the kinds of wasps that we interact with the most, the social wasps. And those include true hornets, of which there are no true hornets in Colorado, at least not yet. The European hornet was introduced well over a century ago to the eastern U.S. and is mostly found east of the Mississippi. Paper wasps are very common as well, and like some of the yellow jackets, they will build their paper combs under the eaves of your house and in other locations where, if you're not careful, you might encounter them unexpectedly. And of course, when we put food out for other organisms like birds, we put out jelly and oranges for orioles where we live. And yet, look who shows up. It's a couple of potter wasps, a mason wasp, and a paper wasp, and then there's a bumblebee in there too. So we don't like that about them either, that they take advantage of our good nature aimed at other species. So what is a wasp anyway, by the way? They're a member of the order Hymenoptera. The name means marriage wing. They have two sets of wings, and the front pair and the back pair are linked in flight. So it appears they have essentially one pair of functional wings in flight, but it's actually two pair that are joined. True wasps have a wasp waist. That is, it's very easy to tell that it has a head, a thorax, where all the locomotion appendages are attached, and then the abdomen. Whereas in sawflies and horntails, what I've come to call proto-wasps, because they're the precursor to true wasps, their abdomen is joined broadly to their thorax, and so it's difficult to make those distinctions between their major body parts. Ants and bees also have that wasp waist to them, and the more we learn about their relationship to other wasps, it's becoming apparent that ants and bees are merely a subset of wasps, and I think we'll see that coming out as a formal announcement eventually. Okay, well, why should you love wasps? We just talked about the reasons you might loathe them. Well, the truth of the matter is that most wasps, in contrast to yellow jackets, they're solitary. Every female does her own thing. They're very tiny. The overwhelming majority of wasp diversity is 10 millimeters or less. In fact, most of it is under 5 millimeters. I took these pictures through a microscope. That should give you some indication of how tiny most wasp species are. The fairy flies, in fact, the lower left photo, are probably among the smallest insects we know of. It's said that some species could fly through the eye of a needle. And given the ones I've seen, I can believe that. So the other thing is that they can't sting. I mean, something this tiny obviously can't sting you, but most wasps don't sting. And of those that do, it's only the females that sting, because the sting is a modified egg-laying organ that's been weaponized to deliver venom now instead of an egg. And that venom is usually used to paralyze or kill a host. Wasps are extremely important ecologically, as we'll see here, and they offer free pest control in your garden. So, hey, what's not to like? Now, not all wasps look like wasps. There are many species for which the females are wingless, and they're ground dwellers, or in some cases climbers, but not having wings allows them access into tight spaces that other wasps can't go into. So in the case of velvet ants, females of all species that I'm aware of are wingless. They do sting very painfully, by the way. So if you see a big hairy ant running around, don't reach down to pet it. But there's other species of wasps in other families that also may have wingless females. I love wasps myself because I think they're beautiful. They can be these incredibly brilliant, iridescent metallic things. Most wasps that we're familiar with are clad in some kind of combination of black and white, or yellow, orange, or red. And of course, that's to announce that, hey, I can sting, I can defend myself well, you just don't want to mess with me. So it pays to announce yourself with warning colors. And of course, non-stinging insects have co-evolved in many cases to mimic those warning colors themselves, even though they can't sting. Well, this is the Pollinator Summit, so of course I'm going to talk about the role of wasps in pollination. Now, most wasps are what we call flower visitors. They're there strictly to feed on nectar, and any pollination they do is by happenstance. They're not setting out to harvest pollen. But there is an exception, and that's the pollen wasps in Colorado. They're in the genus Pseudomycetes. They look a lot like a yellow jacket, but they're obligatory pollinators of penstemon, or beard's tongue, as some of you might know the flower by. And so, lacking hairs like bees have to collect pollen, they actually ingest pollen and nectar, carry it back to the nest, which is something that looks similar to a mud dauber nest, regurgitate that pollen and nectar into the mud cell as food for their larval offspring, seal the cell, and then repeat the process. But again, most wasps are going to be flower visitors, and there's certain flowers that they prefer over others. In my experience, wasps like white or yellow flowers that are either composites, that are arranged in umbels, or that are in racemes. Well, why is this? Wasps like to have one-stop shopping. They like to visit a flower or several flowers together and not have to fly from flower to flower. And so they can get the biggest bang for their buck in these situations where you've got a composite, an umbel, or a raceme. They also like to see what's going on around them while they're feeding. And so having these non-tubular flowers they prefer, because they can see what, an approach of a predator, for example. The other thing is that wasps don't have very long tongues. Bees have, in many cases, very long tongues. They can reach into the bottom of a tubular corolla. Wasps don't have that. They have very short mouth parts. And so the shallow flowers found in these situations, arrangements, are more to their liking. But there's more to it than that. Many flowers, or many plants, I should say, produce extrafloral nectaries. That is, they exude sweet substances from other parts of the plant. And sunflowers are a really good example of this. And so you may see wasps or bees or flies around a sunflower blossom that has yet to bloom. And that's because the bracts of that blossom are exuding this sweet substance that is attracting these insects. The base of the leaves often have extrafloral nectaries as well. Many plants produce substances like this from other parts of their anatomy other than flowers. Wasps will also feed on oozing, fermenting sap from injured trees or plants. They like their alcohol as much as we do, apparently. And so you can find them in those situations as well. Again, they're craving carbohydrates to fuel their adult activity. And before you destroy your aphid colonies in your plants, you might want to hear this. Aphids and scale insects are sap suckers. They have to take in huge amounts of sap to get any nutritional value out of it. And so at the same time they're feeding, they're spewing out copious amounts of a sugary liquid waste product that is called honeydew. And if you've ever parked your car under a tree infested with aphids, you know what I'm talking about. It's sticky, it's hard to clean off, it'll breed sooty mold if you leave it there long enough. Really bad news for us, but really important source of carbohydrates for bees, wasps, flies, and other insects, especially in early spring and right now in late fall when there aren't many, if any, flowers in bloom. So this is an incredibly important source of carbohydrates for insects when flowers are not that abundant. Now, this is something that I didn't include in my book because I learned about it after the fact, but many plants have evolved seeds that are dispersed by insects, and mostly it's done by ants, but in a few cases it's aimed at wasps. And so what the plant does is when it produces seeds, it produces another body of protein and fat attached to that seed, and that body is called an elaiosome. And it's very attractive to wasps that want to feed their larvae back at the nest protein material. So they cut the seed and the elaiosome off the plant, fly off to some place where they perch, cut off the elaiosome and drop the seed, so it's now no longer near its point of origin, and then take that elaiosome back to feed to their larvae in the colony. Fascinating method of seed dispersal. Trilliums are one example of plants that do this. Well, I mentioned that wasps are free pest control, and they do that in a couple of ways. Most wasps lead what we call a parasitoid lifestyle, and that is basically a parasite that invariably kills the host. And so we see on the left photo an Ichneumon wasp using her ovipositor. That's not a sting, it's an ovipositor. She's laying an egg inside this tiny caterpillar. The wasp larva that hatches inside that caterpillar is going to wait while the caterpillar goes ahead and feeds and grows until it reaches a point that triggers the development of the wasp larvae. And the wasp larva feeds on the inside of the caterpillar, saving the vital organs until the last minute, and eventually emerges as an adult wasp from either the shriveled caterpillar or from the pupa stage. There are other parasitoids that we're more familiar with that act a bit differently. So the mud dauber, in this case, she has paralyzed a spider that she is now taking to her mud nest. She's going to stuff it in a cell full of other paralyzed spiders, lay an egg on the last victim, seal that cell with mud, and then repeat the process. And so she's mass provisioning with paralyzed spiders. They're paralyzed so that they won't spoil before the larval wasp can consume them. Kind of diabolical, but very efficient. And so a lot of solitary wasps have this lifestyle. They nest above or underground. And so here we have a true predatory wasp in the paper wasp on the left. She is killing and chewing up a fly that she will feed immediately to her larval siblings back in their colony. So they outright kill the prey that they're after and feed it directly to their offspring. But in the case of the other parasitoid wasps, like the mud daubers, they're very host specific. They attack only usually one kind of insect or at one stage in its life, and then they mass provision a nest for their offspring. And parasitoid wasps can attack, I mean, like I said, they're host specific, but collectively they attack basically all insects, spiders, many other kinds of arthropods at all stages in their life. So one species of insect can have easily 2 or 3 different kinds of wasp parasitoids attacking it at different life stages, and that includes the egg stage. And so here we see a couple of wasps on the right that are going to carry out their entire life cycle within the egg, a single egg of their host insect. So how can we help wasps? Hopefully I've convinced you they're worth helping. The easiest way, I think, is to simply be what I call weed tolerant. Now, if you have a state or federally listed noxious weed in your yard, that's got to go. There's good reason we don't want those weeds around. But most of the things that are going to volunteer themselves in your yard or garden are going to be either native wildflowers or naturalized plants like dandelion, for example. And they should be welcome in your yard as, kind of complementary pollination sources for whatever you decide to plant. And hopefully you will landscape with either native plants, or maybe you want to include a mix of native and ornamental plants in a pollinator garden. These 2 photos were taken in Tucson, Arizona. The pollinator garden is a memorial for a young girl who died in an auto accident, and she was a big fan of butterflies. And so they thought memorializing her in the pollinator garden was a great thing to do, and it is. The photo on the left is of a bed and breakfast property, and they landscape for wildlife because that they are attracting a clientele that appreciates going there and observing wildlife. Another thing you can do to help wasps is minimize outdoor lighting. And outdoor lighting in general is bad news for most organisms. Even day active animals, their period of activity is extended by artificial light at night, so it's shortening their lifespan, maybe disrupting their reproductive cycles as well. And that's certainly the case for the effect of outdoor lighting on nocturnal animals. It disproportionately affects aquatic insects. We're not quite sure why yet. Really bad news. And many wasps are nocturnal. Well, why is that? It's because their hosts are active at night. So a lot of the caterpillars are feeding at night, and so their wasp parasitoids are actively looking for them. If you've ever turned on a light for moths, you often will get wasps coming to those lights as well. They're often very tiny, as you can see by the thread count on these photos of wasps that have come to my own black light at night. Another thing you can do to help wasps is provide housing. If you're already using bee condos or bee blocks, as they're called, or bundles of hollow twigs, wasps, some solitary wasps will use these as well. Now, some people will tell you this is the worst thing you can do for bees because a bee hotel is just breeding fungi and mites and bacteria and other things that are harmful to bees. My feeling on the matter is we don't give enough credit to a wasp or bee for deciding what is an appropriately healthy nest hole versus what is not. Now, that said, I do retire my own bee blocks annually so that they're not reused more than once. But as in bird feeders, it's more to help you understand what kinds of wasps and bees are in your neighborhood than it is, providing something that is superior to the natural cavities that they would nest in. So if you can leave dead logs and dead standing trees, that's better than putting out bee blocks. But when we had ours out in Colorado, we had a couple of mason wasps here that used them. We also got this interesting thing. We had a certain kind of leafcutter bee utilizing the nest as block as well. But then we had these wasps that would sit on the edge of the nest box and watch them. And they're saphigids. And what they do is they calculate the interval of time when the bee is not at her nest cavity. And then when they figure that out, they go in when she's away, lay an egg, and their offspring will then feed on the pollen and nectar stored for that bee offspring, usually killing the host egg or larvae before they consume the stash of pollen and nectar. Cuckoo wasps are often found around bee blocks as well. They're brilliantly metallic, very fast moving, and they're heavily armored. They don't sting, but because of their host selection, which is other wasps and bees, they're heavily armored and can roll in a ball to protect themselves from bites and stings of their hosts. So they're often found around bee blocks as well. You also want to leave some bare soil in your yard because the majority of the solitary wasps that are the larger parasitoids will nest in the ground. And this includes sand wasps and thread-waisted wasps. And they nest in soils of varying types. Sand wasps prefer sandy soil, not surprisingly, but other wasps will nest in other kinds of soil, as well as solitary bees, which you probably know already. So yeah, leave some bare patches of soil in your yard for them to nest in. You can also help wasps by observing them and recording your observations. Here we have two gentlemen observing a hornet nest from a safe distance. And of course, I'm kidding, they're birders, but I couldn't resist the link. And record your observations, please, on a platform like iNaturalist. There you can record any form of living thing, by the way, anywhere on the planet. Also, it's not just restricted to the United States. Project Noah is a very similar platform. It's maybe a little more student-friendly if you have children. Bug Guide covers all terrestrial North American arthropods. So that includes like crayfish and things, as well as insects and spiders and other arachnids. So placing your observations in one of these platforms is extremely helpful to both scientists and other members of the public. And with that, I'll leave you with my obligatory Amazon moment. If you like the book Wasps and or me, and hopefully you still do after this talk, you might also like these selections. Insectpedia is my latest. It is also from Princeton University Press, like the Wasps book. Insects Did It First is available through Ex Libris, and I'm the lead author of the Kaufman Field Guide to Insects of North America. And with that, I want to thank Kate Hogan, who I hope is recovering comfortably. I understand she has COVID now, but I wanted to thank her for inviting me to this. My partner Heidi for putting up with me while I construct these presentations. Unipress Books is the one that initiated the Wasps book from across the pond. Princeton University Press picked it up. And if you use the discount code ERE30, that's good for a 30% discount on either Wasps or Insectpedia. My mentors, past, present, and future, I don't know, I didn't learn everything I shared with you today on my own. I've had the influence of many fine and upstanding citizens, and I continue to learn from them. And thank all of you here. I'll leave you with my contact information if you have questions that aren't addressed here at the end of the talk.
Thanks so much, Eric, for such an informative talk. You can hear us still okay, right, Eric?
Yes, yes.
How about if anybody's got questions, I'll transfer them and repeat them to the audience as well. Any questions?
One of the best pollinators for wasps around here that's a native plant is our fern bush, Kimabekti area.
Yes.
Fern bush. Again, I'm a bee guy, not a plant guy. So really good for wasps as well?
Really good for wasps.
Nice. Fern bush.
What time of year do you replace your pollinator hotels?
A question for Eric. What time of year do you replace your pollinator hotels?
I usually bring them in more or less about, about now, certainly after the first frost. I mean, I still see a few Ichneumon wasps around at this time of year, and this morning I got a little tiny wasp on our door. So there's still activity, but the things that nest in blocks are pretty much finished by now. So I'll bring them into our garage, where they're still exposed. If there's anything in there, it's still exposed to the same temperatures basically as outdoors. I'll put them in a little mesh cage, if you will, so that if something hatches out, I can release it once that happens. But yeah, about now would be a good time to do that.
Another question.
Yeah, with climate change, and since wasps are obviously in a bee hotel or some kind of a habitat, does the climate change affect that? And especially since that lines up with the things that it's going to prey on.
Yeah, so Eric, a question about climate change in wasps. So we've heard a lot about climate change impacts on bees and cavity nesting bees too, but do we know much about climate change impacts on our wasps?
Oh, excellent question. Wow, wow, where do I begin? It's a little too soon to tell, for one thing. We don't have enough data in the books quite yet, I don't think. The other thing is that unless an insect is economically important, either negatively as a pest or positively as a beneficial, chances are we don't know much about them, period, let alone how they're being affected by what we're doing to them. I mean, I've noticed wild swings in weather from year to year. So one year will be a drought year, another will be an overly wet year. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about out there. And so, how insects adapt to that is going to be the interesting thing. And that's where I don't think we have enough data yet to tell us, because some years, some insects like grasshoppers proliferate very well during a drought year, whereas other insects do not. So it's going to vary from year to year, and we're probably not going to see the cumulative impacts for a while. Does that mean we need to stop worrying about climate change? No, obviously. But what you can do as far as helping to alleviate that, pardon, are going to be your choices in the marketplace. And the less you engage corporate level international commerce, the better. Okay, that's going to help solve invasive species, because we're not going to be bringing as much stuff over from other countries. It's going to lower the carbon footprint because things are not coming long distances. So I encourage people to shop local in every sense of the word, but especially in terms of agriculture. And so the more you help out your local farmers and ranchers, the better.
All excellent points. I would add one thing to what Eric said, that while we may not have good data on how wasps are responding to climate change, we do have relatively good data on how their hosts are. So many butterfly species declining, lots of other insects having declines because of climate change. And so if their hosts are having issues, you might guess, a priori, that their parasitoids, which are dependent on them, also are. Would you agree with that?
I would. Yeah.
So we need more data. That's always what I preach.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what your observations on iNaturalist and Bug Guide and other platforms are helpful. Because we don't have enough scientists doing that work. Most entomologists are engaged in economic entomology, so agriculture, forestry, veterinary entomology, public health, especially. So that's where all the resources are going. So it's kind of incumbent upon us to kind of fill that void.
Awesome. Well, how about another big round of applause? Thanks so much, Eric.